Oh, I was sent down from Washington, D.C. to see about these murders.
See what about him?
We'll see who's doing it.
If there were a film in Martin Scorsese's oeuvre that could be labeled as the outlier, it would likely be Silence. Be it the dreamlike murkiness of Taxi Driver, the irresistible suave of Goodfellas, and the indulgent comedy of The Wolf of Wall Street, only a few works have left an impression as strong as his 2016 feature, Silence.
I pray, but I'm lost. Or am I just praying to nothing? Nothing.
Much like its name, the film is tonally reserved. It deviates from the classic Hollywood gangster flick that has become partially associated with Scorsese.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
The film's aesthetics have a transfixing formal simplicity, and the gradual manner in which the story beats unfold is unrelentingly interrogative. Rodriguez's journey there captures both the sharpest point and deepest catharsis of humanity, which is apt for the biblical nature of the text. There is no leniency in Silence's depiction of the violence and dread that the persecuted Christians experienced in the 17th century Japan. Harrowing moments of execution and opacity scatter a largely meditative and tranquil narrative.
Surely God heard their prayers as they died. But did he hear their screams?
In Scorsese's latest feature, Killers of the Flower Moon, the calculated slaughter of the Osage people shares less with Silence than it does with Scorsese's second most recent film, The Irishman. Both Killers of the Flower Moon and The Irishman recall the aura of the classic American gangster flick that popularized Scorsese for much of the film community.
Oklahoma, where famine walk by day and hungry wolves by night. Can you find the wolves in this picture?
Still, more notably, both works share a certain coldness that stamps the life out of the characters and their actions. The murders in these films forego all emotion for an entirely procedural tone. Each death is either just a task to be completed for a financial incentive or a loose end that needs to be tied up. And even though such an approach has fostered some criticism regarding the lack of attention given to the Osage community in the film, it's a fitting tone to establish for a film that takes a look at imperialism from the perspective of the imperialist. Other films of the 2020s have also taken on this attitude in their attempt to illustrate the callousness inherent to America's advancement as a country as well as its environment in the 21st century. The former is touched upon in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, which captivates with its rhythms of scientism flowing through the US military-industrial complex and academia, only to end on an unforgettable image that depicts the end result of what the film calls the chain reaction. The latter is a central interest in David Fincher's The Killer, where the director's 90s nihilism is satirized and sharpened into a runtime of taciturn artificiality.
Stick to the plan. Anticipate, don't improvise. Fight only the battle you're paid to fight. Trust no one.
Killers of the Flower Moon concentrates its banality on its two imperialistic main characters, William King Hale and Ernest Burkhart. Hale instructs Burkhart within the setting of the Osage Nation, manipulating him into betraying his own spouse, murdering the native members, and stealing their property. De Niro perfectly plays his character like an ostensibly well-intentioned politician, expressing zero hatred for the Osage and instead even complimenting them here and there. There's a clarity to Scorsese's portrayal of racism here, rendered with dehumanizing condescension rather than in intense sentiments, similar to his portrayal in Taxi Driver. However, the motivation behind this polite facade is, of course, that of malicious greed, a foundational building block of America's economic political system.
You know, Molly, she likes her nice things, so...
Not as much as you do.
Almost sounded to me like he was calling me a squaw man, Bill.
But even then, the Bureau of Investigation eclipses Hale, reminding us that he's just another cog in the imperialistic engine who controls an even smaller cog.
What about the other dead Osage? 25, it's gotta be almost 30 now.
Yeah.
Seems more like an epidemic than bad luck to me.
Just like how Burkhart deceives his Osage wife, Molly, Hale tricks Burkhart for his gain.
But you need to sign this here now. Something happens to you, the head right's got to stay in the family. This is the only way to do it.
The uncle-nephew relationship between Hale and Burkhart is, then, also that of the self-interested colonialist and his hapless associate whom he makes use of. In this way, the film structures itself into layers of fraud, painting its portrait of America not with the blunt ruthlessness of mass theft or murder, but rather with the poignant stream of lies and disillusionment.
I am to take care of you. No one's gonna hurt you when I'm in front.
At the heart of the film is the Osage community, but the perspective taking on them is, as mentioned before, that of the imperialists. So, it is understandable why Scorsese maintained a certain distance from the Osage people in the film, since he knows he can't fully empathize with their experience. The natives are constantly sidelined in the film's eyes, just as they were by European settlers, comparable to Nolan's omission of Japanese suffering as a result of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings in Oppenheimer. Scorsese doesn't want to reduce his film down to simplistic portrayal of grief. Instead, he scrutinizes the American view on its native population and how that contributed to the feasibility of their murder with no consequence. Still, even with this distance, Scorsese infuses scenes with the Osage people with the sublimity that often reminds us of the liberating grace of Malachian cinema. In particular, an early scene depicts the death of Molly's mother. As she passes away, the soundscape clears and there's an image of her meeting other deceased members of her community as the living mourn intensely, with their cries silenced in the sound design. Hallucination of owls, an indication that death is close by in the Osage culture, is another example of this category of transcendental filmmaking that interpurses the stream of institutionalized and rationalized evil that imbues most of the film. As a result, Killers of the Flower Moon is not entirely devoid of hope despite the inherent bleakness of its subject matter.
Expecting a miracle to make all this go away. You know they don't happen anymore.
In the end, Hale and Burkhart got off easy, released on parole and pardon respectively, and Scorsese states sorrowfully in his most notable cameo,
"There was no mention of the murders."
And even with his fittingly satirical coda, there's a humility to the film's finale, particularly in the choice of devoting its final image to the Osage people. It's a clear indication of Scorsese's acknowledgement of colonial institutionalized viewpoints, his inability to fully fathom the other side, and above all, his primary concern with humanity.